Hello everyone and welcome to Funky Monkey MP, where you get your weekly dose of mini painting, history and world building. Before we dive into today's story, let's talk about the Mini. This is Brooke, the Scottish Fold cleric from Animal Adventures Tales of Cats and Catacombs. As a disclaimer, not going for a zenithal priming was a conscious choice, as I wanted the colors to be more vivid and it is quite hard to cover black pigment with something very bright. Now for today's story. We'll talk about roads. It doesn't sound that appealing, but believe me, there are very interesting elements that we will discuss today. First, we will understand where it all began, the oldest road. And then we'll talk about things like milestones, speed bumps, and even crosswalks. We will go on a tour around the world, starting with Northern Africa, then Middle East, Asia, back to the Middle East, and then Europe. It is important to understand where it all began and why roads are so important. When you think of ancient civilizations, you of course think of the Colosseum, the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the Acropolis, and so much more. But, very important, you must think of roads. Roads allow for the exchange of goods, of information, of technology, and people, and wealth. All of these lead to the construction of the structures I have mentioned above. Nowadays, when we think of ancient roads, and even medieval ones, two main images come to mind. The first image we get is that of dirt roads, ankle-deep mud, animal droppings, human waste, etc. And that's not very far from the truth, but it's not the whole truth. The second image we conjure up is that of majestic paved roads in the middle of wealthy settlements, in front of monuments. And that is not far from the truth either, but it's not the whole truth. Of course, the truth is somewhere in the middle. As we will see moving forward, there are many types of roads with many uses and many methods of constructing them. First off, let's talk about ancient Egypt. But before we start that tale, let's see how the painting is going. As you can see at this stage, I am applying several layers of highlights, trying to mimic silk catching the light. First stop, Northern Africa, ancient Egypt. As I'm sure you've heard of the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx, the Temple of Thebes, and the Nile Delta, I'm not sure you've heard of their roads. Surely a civilization capable of building such wonders was very proficient at building roads. And yeah, they were. But we haven't heard that much about their roads. That's gonna change right now. There is a catch when it comes to ancient Egypt. They didn't invest that much in their roads, as much of their trade was done over the Nile, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. But that doesn't mean they didn't have marvelous roads. As we'll see, there are several inscriptions that tell us about their paved roads. One of the most interesting comes from the Greek historian and geographer Herodotus, who tells us that, I quote, "For 10 years 100,000 men toiled on the pyramid, but the road that surfaced its construction was no less of a marvel. Almost 930 meters or 3,033 feet long, 20 meters or 60 feet wide, and at its highest point almost 15 meters or 48 feet, all of it of polished stone and carved figures in it." As we can see, there are wondrous roads that the ancient Egyptians built. Moving on, another paved road closer to our time is one that links a stone quarry to some lesser known pyramids within the territory of ancient Egypt. It was 10 meters or 33 feet in width, and it was made of mud bricks finished with clay and paved with fieldstones in certain parts. You have to understand that roads were not completely paved from one end to the other. Instead, areas that needed reinforcing or leveling were actually paved for ease of use. An interesting aspect is that ancient Egyptians used distant markers or milestones every 3.3 kilometers or 2 miles. One of the most important and intriguing aspects when it comes to roads in ancient Egypt is that the oldest paved road known to man can be found here. It was around 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles in length, 2 meters or 6 feet width, and it was paved with slabs of limestone, sandstone, and petrified wood here and there. It was built between 4,600 and 4,200 years ago, between 2,600 and 2,200 BCE, before Common Era. This road connected a stone quarry to the temples and pyramids in the Giza area. If you want to find out more about the oldest paved road in human history, please search for Lake Moeris Quarry Road. I'm gonna leave the name right here. Now, as bonus information, when you think of ancient Egypt, I'm sure first animal that comes to mind is the camel. But the ancient Egyptians' favorite pack animal was the mule, with a horse and chariot being introduced much later, around 3,700 years ago, so around 1,700 BCE. When it comes to the camel, it was introduced to the Egyptians even closer to our time, around 200 BCE, so almost 2,200 years ago. So first they had mules, then they had horses and chariots, and then they had the camels. Now, before we move on, let's see how the painting is coming along. As you can see, the mini is starting to really take shape, and I'm trying to bring out the details on the backpack and the blanket. Let's continue on our way. Ancient Assyria and Babylon. Although they share the same period of time, they do share the same space, and they follow one another, with the Babylonians conquering the Assyrians at one point. Although that is a story for another time. Now let's talk about their roads. What we do know is that one of the first main roads in this part of the world was constructed 5,500 years ago. That means around 3,500 BCE. And it was nothing more than a very wide, very well beaten dirt road. It linked Susa, modern-day Shash in Iran, to Ephesus on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in modern-day Turkey. It was a little over 2,400 kilometers or 1,500 miles, and the only paved segments were those close to very important settlements. Around 3,200 years ago, in about 1,200 BCE, the Assyrians decided to upgrade and improve this dirt road, and they did so by implementing something unheard of before that moment. And that was a privileged communication system. A privileged communication system meant that only state envoys and those messengers carrying state letters were allowed to use this road, nobody else. This system was something unheard of before that moment, and it meant a new chapter in the importance and development of roads, as we will see further on. The ability to communicate from one side of the empire to the other by using roads, very well guarded and very well maintained, for that period of time of course, meant that the Assyrians were able to create a very cohesive empire and were able to transmit orders and information from one side to the other in a very, very short period of time compared to previous methods of communication. Later on, the Babylonians improved certain segments of this road, such as one that linked the royal palace in the capital to the most important temples in the city. They improved this road by using burnt bricks as pavement and bituminous mortar. Bitumen is the black, sticky substance that we nowadays use in asphalt. So they used this around 615 BCE, almost 2600 years ago. That is quite impressive. Now, as we move on with our story, let's see how the painting is going. At this stage, I'm going through several colors and combinations in an attempt to bring out the details even more. Small areas that are being highlighted ever so slightly. As I promised you, now we will be visiting Asia, ancient India. One of the largest settlements in this part of the world is Mohenjo-daro. What's interesting about this settlement, among many other things, is that it is the first known settlement to be laid in a grid pattern, with its main road being 800 meters long, or half a mile, and it was 10 meters or 32 feet wide. As we get closer to our time, between 320 BCE and 180 BCE, almost 2,400 kilometers or 1,500 miles of roads were built. A Greek ambassador to this part of the world mentions that the roads were well kept and that they were lined with trees to offer shade for travelers, as well as rest houses being set up for the benefit of the travelers. Moreover, when the road crossed the river, free ferry services were provided by the state. Even closer to our times, in 405 CE, Common Era, a Chinese pilgrim tells us that during the Gupta period, the roads were very secure and made very comfortable for travelers. With that, we leave behind ancient India, so let's see how the miniature is coming along. As you can see right here, I'm trying to create a gradient and applying brighter and brighter shades of gray in an attempt to selectively highlight the miniature. Make it pop a little bit and create those deep shadows. And with that out of the way, let's step from the real world into fantasy world. Halflings in my world mostly have very well crafted dirt roads, lined with hedges and flowers. Think of Tolkien's Shire. The only paved roads are those that lead to the main feasting meadows in every major halfling settlement. These roads are paved with colorful stones and are the subject of a future video. Gnomes use technology to create very accurate roads. Using high precision tools, the roads are perfectly straight, their curves are perfectly calculated, and the milestones are perfectly placed. And with that, we're gonna leave fantasy world behind and we're gonna take one final look at the miniature. I've always found it very difficult to paint in eyes, but in time I hope I will get better at it, make my miniatures look more alive, not in a constant state of shock. With that, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you learned something, I hope you found some inspiration, and hopefully I'll see you next time on Funky Monkey MP. Have yourselves a wonderful day and see you all next time. Cheers!